Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's been almost a year since I chaired a webinar about slavery following the death of George Floyd and the then rapid acknowledgement across the country and indeed the world of the ongoing hurt and upset for many that monuments and the like, which celebrated slave owners, have on Black people. We saw how this culminated in the toppling of one such statue in the harbour in Bristol. At that first webinar, we heard from experts on the slave trade, as well as on modern slavery. A few weeks later, I then chaired a meeting of young people to explore how they were impacted by the Black Lives Matter movement. So it seems right now that we have a look back over the last year and see what progress has been made since then and what more there is to do. I'd like to first of all introduce the panel, who will give a short presentation each. If you have any questions, then please pop them into the question and answer, and we'll try and get those, and as many as we can, answered after all the presentations. So I'd first like to introduce my panel, and I'll try and introduce them in the order that they will be speaking later. So I first have Elijah Green from Boys in Mind. I then also have Jason Pegg from Black Families Education Support Group. I will be representing Bath and North East Somerset Race Panel. Richard White, who is here from the Bath Spa University to talk about the importance of reinterpreting and highlighting Bath's many links with the transatlantic slave trade. Polly Andrews is here from Bath Abbey. I also have Claire Dixon and Amy Frost from the Bath Preservation Trust. Louise Campion is here from the Holborn Museum. And finally, I should probably actually introduce myself. My name is Dine Romero, and I'm the Cabinet Member for Children, Young People, Communities and Culture. And I also chair the race panel. So without further ado, I will now start our webinar proper, but I just need to remind everybody that this webinar is being recorded, but will be available on the Council's YouTube, hopefully by tomorrow. So obviously, if you really enjoy this, you can have a rewatch it in your own time, and also please feel free then to share the link with anybody else that you think would enjoy watching this webinar. So I now hand over to Elijah from Boys in Mind, who will introduce the first Black Lives Matter race equality film that was made by Boys in Mind. Over to you, Elijah.
Thank you very much. So my name is Elijah Green. I'm a youth advisor for Boys in Mind. I've been a part of the team for almost 3 years now. Boys in Mind have created many projects with the aim to create an environment that helps young people develop personal skills to feel confident in who they are and to celebrate diversity. This approach allows young people to become more productive and active members of society and to use their voice and to be proud of it. The first film we made, the Black Lives Matter film, was made in response to George Floyd's death in May 2020. This film was the first time many of us involved in the project discussed what life was like being Black in Bath. It has been a long journey for me personally to accept myself and love my skin. But this project really helped me, and I found a lot of comfort in it, and I feel proud to be who I am. I asked a few good friends of mine to participate in this film. The Black Lives Matter film helped me gain a better understanding of my friends and the trauma that we all share, and it's actually kind of brought us together to fight and challenge discrimination in everything we do going forward. This film looks at all of our personal stories and, all of our shared experiences with racism in the past, which was a challenge for us to talk about it because it brought back uncomfortable memories of our lives in schools and certain work environments. This film, we wanted to use this as a source for schools to play in classrooms and to share our message and to kind of essentially give some of these Black students some confidence in knowing that they do have a voice and they are here to feel accepted and to just crack on with their education and to be accepted. This film looks at the lasting effects of racism, the importance of the Black Lives Matter message, and what we feel needs to happen in the future to create a better environment for the next generation to grow up in a beautiful city like Bath and feel like they belong here. From the success of this film, we were able to partnership with Black families and B&NES Council to create a Race Equalities in Schools project, looking at what secondary schools can do to promote equality. This film does have a lot of personal stories in, and it is a powerful film. So I appreciate it for listening, and I hope you enjoy it. And yeah.
It doesn't matter what the reason was, he was murdered, and no one deserves to be murdered. And you know, especially like that, it's just horrible.
When I watch a Black person die because of the colour of their skin, I feel it. I feel like I don't know, it brings all those memories back of every situation you've been in where you are reminded that you are different. You get all of these feelings, you start to just become angry, and you know, I don't even know the guy, but I know everyone was furious. And you know, it's not even Black people, you know, everyone was furious. How can we still let this happen? How?
To me, these issues aren't just current issues, and I feel that everybody that is saying that seems to have forgotten the history that has taken place in the Black community.
I went to the Bath protest some months ago and I loved it. I loved every second of it. I was hearing people speak for it. I was kneeling and raising my fist for George Floyd. These protests have just shown me that there's still, you know, things to fight for, and there are people who have my back and actually appreciate and love me for who I am. I've never felt more proud to be, you know, a person of colour.
So I remember one day my parents sat me down, they asked me a question. What do you see yourself as, Black or white? And you know, this had never occurred to me. My dad is Black, my mum is white. But still, it never occurred to me, like, what am I? Where do I fit in? Because, you know, society tells me as a mixed race person, you don't belong anywhere, or you're seen as Black anyway, you know? You're sort of in that, we don't know where to put you, we'll put you over there.
Like, growing up, I still felt like, you know, that my colour has been like a burden. I got called a lot of names like Panda, Oreo, coconut, so black on the outside, white on the inside.
I've lost count how many times I was called the N-word at school. I couldn't even tell you. Or monkey, like, those are the two words that I think I heard the most at my time at school. For a good 6 years, you know, every other day maybe.
One time in school was just when some guys decided to pick on me, and he started like getting me into headlock and just trying to beat me up, and I was angry, I was mad, of course, like anyone would be in that situation, but just because he saw my skin, he thought, oh, it's a brown boy, I can, you know, I'll mess with him a little bit.
If I told the teachers, told the staff, I'm gonna look like a snake, and that's what they used to call you, like, oh, why are you snaking out the olders? Like, we need to like them because they need to like us, so then we get a higher rep. You know, it's all stupid now that I look back on it, but back then, being popular was like the biggest worry ever. All you wanted to do was to have friends and just to be accepted for who you are. But if everyone only sees you as a monkey, it's just a passing comment to them. But for me, that is something that I've internalized, and it's shaped me into who I am now.
I got called the N-word in primary school when I was about 9 years old. Now, my parents had educated me about this. My dad's Jamaican Indian, he's a Black man, and my mum's Jamaican Sicilian. But I didn't quite know the severity of this word, and I got called it in the playground, and I think that for me was the start of realising that I was going to be treated differently because of the colour of my skin.
I've seen many cases of discrimination happen over the years, but one that really stands out to me, probably when I was about 10 or 11, and I have a black friend, and we went to go to the park and play football as we usually would, and whilst we were having a kickabout, a lad appears out of the distance and just starts shouting the N-word. So we obviously cut our football session early because we just wanted to get away from it. And then we went back to my house whilst he was still shouting it as we were walking across the field. And as soon as we got back to my house, in the house, my friend just started crying.
I think probably the worst was when I was 12 years old. I was walking through the streets of Bath, and a group of homeless people called me dirty and said that I had dirty skin and said that I was a dirty girl. That's humiliating, and that does a lot to your self-esteem when you're a 12-year-old girl. And I will never forget that.
I remember at one of my old jobs, my boss said to me, "Oh, Sam, stop brown nosing." And she looked back at me and was like, "Huh," literally, and was just there laughing. I was shocked. I didn't know what to do. Like, this person's meant to be my boss. This is meant to be the person I'm meant to go to if there's a problem. And you know, from being the only black person in that work, in that entire building that day, I didn't know what to do, so I just went with it. And you know, that's what a lot of people do because there's no one else around us to help. We just go with it.
I had so much difficulties with my hair. Like, I used to hate my hair. I wanted to shave it all off so then people would stop touching it. That was the real reason why I shaved it off, because everyone was just touching my hair, like, and I've spent like 45 minutes combing it out in the morning to make it look fresh, and everyone's got their dirty fingers in my hair. So I'm like, nah, let me cut it off. Let me just cut it off, and let's not give them that satisfaction. And I was worried because I was thinking, what if I don't even like it? But now I love it. I'm glad I shaved it. So not only can they not touch my hair now, I also prefer the look. So it was a win-win, but it was a big gamble. And the decision I made to cut my hair was simply because people were just putting their hands in it. Now I bet no white person has made that decision because people couldn't stop touching their hair.
What we need to do is teach these people that they're wrong, because if they can be taught to hate, they can be taught to love again.
It definitely has affected me. I've sometimes wondered about my race and not wanted to, but thought if I was if I was like born white or if I was born black, and how, you know, what those differences would mean. But it's definitely been up there. And I've never wanted to change who I am and who I've been, but
Living in Bath, there obviously aren't many ethnic people who who actually live here. So whenever walking into a room, walking into a bar, wherever it is, you feel self-conscious about yourself because you feel the stares and you feel like you're the problem and you just don't want to be there anymore. So you're there left wondering, like, is this the place for me? And it's not fair because, you know, you should be able to feel comfortable wherever you want to go.
Nah, man, I look back on that time and I think, wow, you know, I hated myself. You know, I hated who I was. I hated being black.
I'm studying at one of the best drama schools in the country, which is amazing, but I can't help but always doubt myself and think, did I get in because of the colour of my skin? Do they need me because they need to be diverse? So I'm constantly doubting my talent. Like, are they just pulling the diversity card, or do they want me for me?
You don't really know where you fit. And there's a quote from Denzel Washington. He said, "Is the sheep preaching hate, when he says, "I'm not going to let the wolf eat me anymore." And it doesn't mean that you got to be violent, but you got to stand up. Like, are you going to let that person oppress you? Are you going to let them say these things against you? Or are you going to stand up and not take it anymore?
The Black Lives Matter movement has been going on for a while, and to be honest, I feel like it's been one of the greatest things in my life. Like, it's given me a lot to think about and fight for, and to stand up for. Like, it's police injustice, police killings, common racism, everything. It's unacceptable and it needs to change.
The education system needs to change. People need to know more about black culture, police brutalities, all of these disgusting things that are going on in the world. People need to be educated of racism from a younger age, because this needs to be something that people aren't sort of awakened by now in their late 20s, early 30s. This needs to be something that people know about, and I feel that's down to the next generation. I mean, I want to be telling my children that it's a lot better for them than it has been for me.
There aren't two separate worlds, really, because there's just one. There's just one race, the human race, and we're all the same. We're all part of God's creation. And unfortunately, George Floyd and many more weren't treated like a human.
I do think we're going in the right direction now. Of course we are. We're going in the right direction, and I just hope we can keep pushing that. We have a job to do. It's not just black people that have a job to do, it's everyone. And I'm going to be a part of this movement for as long as I live, and I hope you can do the same.
Thank you, Elijah. That was incredibly powerful. And I think that leads us really nicely into the work that Jason Pegg has been doing. So I'd just like to move on to Jason. If you could unmute, Jason.
Hi there, I'm Jason Pegg. I'm now unmuted, so you can hear what I'm saying. Sorry about that. I'm the development manager for an organisation called the Black Families Education Support Group, and we've been around for possibly about just over 25 years in Bath and North East Somerset, working for race equality, specifically in relation to the education system. So we've been doing some work around developing a race equality charter this past kind of 6 months, and that's part of a partnership with B&NES Council, Sari from Bristol, Off the Record, and a number of other kind of head teachers, reps from schools across Bath and North East Somerset, from Ridlington, Ralph Allen, and St Gregory's. So we've got a whole load of partners involved in developing this race equality charter for schools in Bath and North East Somerset. It was really useful for me to come after the Boys in Mind film and Eli's presentation there, because the charter is informed by the voice of Eli and those other young people who've taken part in films made last year in response to the Black Lives Matter movement and their experiences. And obviously what they've highlighted in terms of their views on racism, on their experiences of hate crime, of race equality, and growing up in Bath from a black and minority ethnic group. They've also obviously highlighted the lasting impact of racism, and they've given their opinion on what now needs to happen in schools and in the education system as a result of those experiences. So I think one of the kind of key questions we were asking ourselves in the task force in kind of developing the charter is, what needs to happen to build on those experiences, to take those experiences into account, and to develop a charter so we can see some lasting change based on those experiences and views of young people that were expressed last year. And are obviously still being expressed. I think one of the dangers is we had a kind of a groundswell of people supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, of films being made, webinars happening. And I think the danger for me and for others was that impetus would be lost, and we could kind of lose kind of the potential for change. So I think part of what the Charter's hoping to achieve is to keep that momentum going and to kind of implement some lasting change in schools. And it's just been great to see how a lot of those head teachers that I mentioned from those schools are just really keen to get on board with the Charter and to help us implement those changes in their schools. So what is the Race Equality Charter? And essentially, it's going to be a public statement of commitment by schools, multi-academy trusts and the local authority to their commitment to eliminating racial discrimination and harassment in schools, to promoting race equality and cultural diversity and fostering good race relations in schools across Bath and North East Somerset. And the Charter is intended to be a framework for those schools to identify the key issues and the specific inequalities relating to race and racism, and to develop actions to address them and evaluate their impact. So the Charter covers a whole range of areas across all aspects of school life, from the ethos and attitudes and the environment that schools create, to pupil progress attainment, to the leadership and management of those schools, to behaviour, and to addressing racial harassment that happens in schools. And also obviously a big area is the curriculum. So diversifying that curriculum and making it kind of, so it reflects, you know, all pupils in Bath and North East Somerset schools, and they can kind of develop their own identities in relation to the curriculum that they're seeing. Why is the Charter important? A number of reasons. I mean, obviously there's a legal and moral duty on schools to tackle racial discrimination and promote race equality. Racism does continue to be a problem in Bath and North East Somerset. I mean, recently, the bad news is that Bath and North East Somerset has been at the top of some league tables around race inequality and things like school exclusion and persistent absence from schools. So there are these key issues that are still happening that kind of highlight inequalities. Eli's talked about some of the experiences that he's had, and obviously the films highlight the experiences that Black young people are still having in schools in relation to name calling, to racial harassment that they're getting. So again, that needs to be addressed. Obviously, the importance of the Charter is we're responding to those experiences and views that were expressed by young people last year and are still being expressed, obviously, tonight. We want schools to send a clear message that they take race equality and racism seriously, and they're taking the appropriate action to address it. We want a consistent approach, and we think a kind of Charter will provide a kind of a framework that allows schools to develop that kind of consistent approach and do things similarly across all schools. And finally, we want to bring around change. There are a lot of challenges with change, and change is a slow process. If we go right back to the 1960s, we can probably see how we've progressed since then. And obviously things are still problematic and the challenges still exist, but we're clearly making progress, and the task force is great evidence of that. It shows how everybody can come together in partnership to meet those challenges and develop something like the Race Equality Charter, hopefully to bring about some change. So we're going to be sitting here next year and we can be pointing to those changes. So yes, in a year's time, when we're doing another webinar, let's hope we've brought about some lasting change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. And so I will pencil in for a year's time to hold another progress webinar for us all to take part in. So I will now, I'd like to give you an update from Bath and North East Somerset's race panel, which is a panel that I chair. So we've been meeting over the last year, and I think many who are here will remember that we set this panel up about a year ago in response to the worldwide spotlight on the issues that are still facing people of colour, and particularly Black people. The events of last year made us challenge our own local history and what more we could do to present a more truthful story to visitors and residents of Bath and also North East Somerset. I think it's important that we remember that our role is not rewriters of history, but as tellers of the full history of the city. And the group has particularly focused on raising our sort of collective consciousness of the impact slavery and enslaved people have had on the history of the city of Bath, and also on the work others have done in abolishing slavery. So some of the things that we've been focusing on are looking at how we can fully promote the lifetime work of people such as Emma Sturge, who ran an anti-slavery depot during the 19th century for about 6 years. We've also been on and promoting history walks, and I'm delighted that in a moment Richard White will be giving us a little bit of I guess a summary of some of the information that he shared with us on one of the walks that we went on, that focuses on, so these walks focus on some of the hidden stories of Bath. And I think as a panel, although we focused significantly on history, I think we've also been clear in our own minds that this is not the sole purpose of the group. And indeed, we've been asked by the public health team on how key message on COVID, for example, could be better presented to Black and brown communities. And we've also been starting a piece of work on bringing together the work that others, including those on this particular webinar, are doing across the region, and provide links to this in our own social media and also on our own web presence too. As I said, we do try and remember that we are a group of volunteers who can't single-handedly change the world. But as a panel, we are very keen to influence our local part of the world and make sure that stories of Black and brown people in Bath and North East Somerset are fully recognised, as is the role many people have played over the centuries in our place. However, this will not be the limit of our work, which has as at heart challenging and calling out discrimination on the grounds of race and colour. So, as I said, this is a very quick whiz through some of the things that we've been focusing on as a panel. It has been quite challenging, I would say, over the year, as we've, I think, only once met him in person, and that was on the walk that Richard took us on. But I think it has been very interesting, and I'm very pleased to be able to say that this work will be continuing until the end of this administration at the very least. And I think I've provided myself with a rather good link into introducing Richard White, as I said, from Bath University, and perhaps you'd like to share with us some of what you told us about on that particular walk, and indeed anything else that you didn't mention on that occasion.
Thanks very much, Dean. Yeah, so my name's Richard White. I should say that I'm a freelance artist as well as working for Bath University. And I also need to put into there's a kind of health warning there that I'm neither a card-carrying historian or heritage expert, although my recent PhD research was very much in the world of heritage and art and walking. I want to really begin with an acknowledgement, and it sort of seems a bit kind of strange for a bunch of white people to be here talking during Black History Month. So I really want to first of all acknowledge my privilege as a white person. The education that I had was very much influenced and in some respects kind of funded by the unpaid labour of Black people working in the plantations of the Caribbean and the wealth that was extracted through the British Empire from countries all around the world. And very much that is embedded, perhaps hidden, but is embedded in the city around us, and that's why this is so important. So my work is I'm using walking as a process to open up conversations, and what I'm going to do is to say, you asked me to kind of talk a bit about what's been done, and then perhaps offer my perspective on where we might all be going. So I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully you can now see a whole series of walks that I hosted at the beginning of a project called Sweet Waters, which began in 2017. And in this respect, I'm standing on the shoulders of many other giants. We've already heard how long the Black Families Support Group have been going. Previously, we heard from Sean Sobers about the work that he'd been doing. There have been people talking about the legacies of slave ownership in this area for a seriously long time. And it is only beginning to kind of surface. And I think that really is the thing that we should be looking in the mirror at ourselves, particularly those of us who have benefited from white privilege, those people white people in authority who haven't responded to this. There is a huge swathe of the history of this city, of this part of the country, of this country, which has been kind of neatly tidied away under the carpet, hidden, forgotten. What I'm calling is reluctant history. All of these walks up and down the river came to various points where there is a sort of a relic, a memory, a trace, a ghost of slave ownership. So we're talking about slave ownership here, and the wealth that was created by those captured and enslaved people, many Africans in the Caribbean plantations, and kind of arrives in Britain, and paid for the great country houses, paid for the wonderful architecture, the speculation around that. Now, some of that we've looked at, and you know, in a sense, it is out there. So this is a matter of public record. So, just a couple of points on the compass. One of the series of walks that I've hosted, I talk about Bath being at the pointiest point of that triangular trade. And another way of looking at it is that the river up to Bath, you can think of that as the mint of the slave trade. Along the river, and again, one of the agencies, organisations that have been doing this for quite some time, telling this story, Saltford Brass Mill. This is the Manila here, was made not at Saltford, but just a mile or so down the river at Keynsham. This is wearable currency. And this is the stuff that was used to buy people in West Africa who were shipped across the Atlantic, the greatest forced migration in human history, by people such as this, who this picture, the Byam family, is in the Holborn. So another of the things that have happened. So the brass mill at Saltford, they've been telling their story for quite some time, very much out about it, and you can go there and be seriously shocked about that element of the trade. And it's hidden away in Bath. You know, look for those, you know, Brass Knocker Hill, Brass Mill Lane, and so on. And the Byam family portrait was painted by Gainsborough. Gainsborough came to Bath because there's plenty of money to be made in painting these hugely rich people. One of the things that's changed in this last year, and I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about it, is that the captions that describe these pictures, which once didn't say anything about who these people were with regard to where they got their money from, that's changing. So there is a change underway. There's wonderful stuff that's happening. Years ago, the Beckford's Tower told its story, and then that kind of faded into the background. Years ago, the Holborn had an exhibition for the 2007 anniversary of the abolition of the slave trade, and that, you know, vanished in institutional memory. but now it's out, things are changing. So the kind of question is, well, okay, well, what about that? And where is this being embedded? And that's really the question that I'm pushing out to you today. What it is about, the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we tell about where we live to the people that come to visit us. And if you go to the Bath UNESCO World Heritage Site, you will find nothing. Here are a few of the searches that I put in. You know, I even put in empire. I thought, well, I'd get Roman Empire. I didn't get Roman Empire. Elite Black people came to Bath. There was a Black Roman emperor who came to Bath. There were all sorts over time. Huge and important people have come to Bath. Haile Selassie, one of the great celebrations that's going on at the moment, is all around that Haile Selassie's presence in Bath. The Freedom of the City celebrations that are going on at the moment. Currently, on the UNESCO World Heritage Site, if you look in sugar, plantation owner, slavery, slave ownership, any of those things, all the stuff that funded these great developments, this beautiful architecture, none of that's there. There's half the story is missing. And that half of the story diminishes me as a white person as much as it diminishes a Black person. That, when we're talking about how do people learn to hate, this is one of the ways that they learn to hate. We don't hear about the elite Black people that visited, and we don't hear about the work that was done there that generated the wealth to get us to where we are. So my focus in pushing this forward is, okay, so what about this UNESCO World Heritage status? The role of UNESCO internationally is about building peace in the minds of men and women. And there's amazing networks that UNESCO, rather Bath, through UNESCO, the World Heritage Site, could be placing us on. The Slave Route Project, for instance, could take us towards kind of those sort of links of movement of people, the movement of wealth and money, how Bath came to be, and help us tell that story in a fuller and more richer way. And currently it doesn't. So final slide, just to put that in a kind of a wider context. So this is about the Slave Routes Project. And I think it's really important that we seriously consider the impacts and the long-term legacies, not only of the slave trade, but also of slave ownership. What does that do to you? And how is that inherited, that white people somehow think that they have the privilege to own another person and to define that other person as somehow not just simply different, difference is a good thing, but somehow lesser. And we need to kind of really, really work with that. This is big stuff, and we need to work with that. And I think the way that we work with it is that that history helps us through to those understandings. And I really hope in all of the projects that you're going to hear now some great stuff that's happening, very exciting stuff moving forward, that we work out ways of how do we embed it. Fantastic exhibition at the Abbey. How do we embed it in the story of this city? And it helps us explain who we are. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And that leads us very neatly by talking about the big stuff. I'm not sure we've got any team that's quite as big as the Abbey, so I'm going to now pass on to Polly, who will talk a bit more about the Abbey exhibition and also the feedback from visitors, which I think is really important.
Thank you, Dina, and thank you, everyone. My name's Polly. I'm the Learning Officer at Bath Abbey, and in my brief 5 minutes, I thought it might be interesting for people to hear the results of an audience survey that we did into our recent exhibition at the Abbey, which ran from May to September. It was called Monuments, Empire and Slavery, and it was the result of feeling very quickly after the events of last summer that we needed to start talking about the colonial history of many of the monuments in Bath Abbey. There are at least 200 with colonial connections, not just to the West Indies, but to other parts of the British Empire as well. We knew that very much that it was just a first step, and we are committed from all sides of the Abbey, clergy, congregation, staff and visitors, to talking further about this story as time goes on. So the audience survey that I'm going to talk about had 95 responses. It was one that was on the boards in the Abbey, the panels, and people could access it using a QR code. So I'm hoping that the data that I'm about to tell you is of interest. There were 95 responses, and 43 were previous visitors to the Abbey and 52 were new to Bath Abbey. And most people, the vast majority in fact, were supportive of the exhibition and its aims and objectives and what we were trying to convey, which was obviously a difficult subject, a painful subject, and we did express regret and sadness from our rector on behalf of the church's involvement, and also included a prayer for anti-racism and more equality in the future. So let me show my first slide. I just have 4 to show you, which hopefully will give you a sense of the data, some of the data at least. Okay, so most people did not come specially to the Abbey to see the exhibition. And as you can see, most people were visitors to Bath. So these were tourists, mainly from August and September. We had a scale for many of the questions of disagree to completely agree. And over 50% of people completely agreed that the exhibition more than met their expectations. 60% completely agreed that it was interesting and informative. And 40% that it made them look at the monuments differently. 35% completely agreed that it made them think about the Abbey differently. And 81% completely agreed that it was good that, or it is good that the Abbey is being honest about its history. 51% completely agreed that they would like to know more about the connections between the Abbey's monuments, the British Empire and slavery as a result of seeing the exhibition. As you can see, the respondents weren't perhaps what you might expect in Bath, an older demographic. We had responses from a wide range of age groups, and encouragingly 25 to 34-year-olds. So that was really interesting to know that people had connected with sufficiently with the exhibition to want to respond to our survey straight away as they'd seen it. And ethnic backgrounds, you can see a range there, which again, as we go forward at the Abbey to think about our next steps, we will be analysing this data in more detail. We do have an oversight group at Bath Abbey, which includes members of Bath's Black community, including Renee Jacobs of the Black in Bath Network, Dr. Sean Sobers, and the Bath Ethnic Minority Senior Citizens Association. And we are due to meet this week to start to ponder the next steps and really get under the skin of the survey. And this really important question, what do you think the Abbey should do next? Because we are committed to taking the next step. We've only just taken the first step. And we made these suggestions. And it's really interesting that the top 3, I think, have come out as these ones. So supporting organisations combating racism and slavery today. That's the number 1 response. Running talks and tours on the subject for the public and schools, and making an information leaflet available to every visitor. But also here, this purple block was also one of the top 3, which is work with other organisations in Bath to research and share this aspect of the city. And to me, that's really encouraging, because really those top 3, the supporting organisations, running talks and tours, working with others, it's all about the Abbey being outward looking, being focused on the city as a whole, the people who live here today and the visitors who come here today and the other heritage organisations that we work with today. So I hope that's useful. I'll leave you with just a couple of quotes from other ideas. We asked for other suggestions for what the Abbey could do next, and lots of really fantastically thoughtful comments, which will be incredibly useful to us, and we will take those forward. So growing the part of the exhibition that looks forward, not just into the past, using artworks to communicate the message that we want to send, and a permanent home, whether we have some kind of memorial, plaque, artwork. We are exploring that from now on, and it's an important place to start from, I think. And then this, hopefully the survey will be helpful, and I hope it's helpful to other people as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. And I think that, one of those very important lines that you had there was about working with others. And I think, just getting a sense from all of the different groups that we've got on this in this webinar, I'm very much aware, for example, from the race panel's work, how much, we've got individuals on there, but how much, there are links into other organisations. And I know the same is very true from the work that you're doing at the Abbey, and I'm sure others will have similar links as well. So I'm now going to ask Claire and Amy if they would like to give us a talk about Bath Preservation Trust, what you've been focusing on, and also your future plans.
Thanks, Dina. Hi everyone, I'm Amy Frost. I'm the Senior Curator at Bath Preservation Trust, and I'm joined by my colleague Claire Dixon, who is the Head of Museums for Bath Preservation Trust. And Richard briefly mentioned it earlier, we've been looking at researching and interpreting the Bath's links with the transatlantic slave trade since around 2006, and particularly focused on a project at that time which covered 5 museums in Bath. And since then our work's continued, particularly focusing on the story of William Beckford and the Beckford family through our ownership of Beckford's Tower at the top of Lansdowne, and their involvement and complicity in the transatlantic slave trade and the obscene amount of wealth that they benefited from through their ownership of enslaved people. And that work has formed a significant aspect of a current major project that was awarded National Lottery Heritage Fund development funding for in November 2019. So as you can imagine, the pandemic caused quite serious delays to that development phase, but we're now really moving forward on the progress of that. And the need for that progress was also highlighted, and the impact that this work can have with the increased public awareness around colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade, in particular since the events of last summer that we've been talking about. And right now we're moving forward with our activity plan, including lots of public consultation with local communities, the creation of a community advisory panel with representations from local communities, including people of colour, including members of Bath's LGBTQ+ community, local residents, and in particular with a group that we are part of, as are many people here this evening, the Bath and Colonialism Action Group. And through discussions and activities, participants and advisors are helping us shape our plans for interpretation for the building, online, and for the landscape. And this is all going to contribute to our final funding application that we're submitting in May next year to the Heritage Fund, which, if successful, hopefully will lead to a kind of major capital project which will reopen the tower in 2024. And there are 3 key elements of that I wanted to kind of bring up this evening. In particular, we are considering how we approach the name Beckford for the building, for the museum. But in particular, what that name means for people who have it as a surname today. And we're working with Black British people who have the surname Beckford, in particular historian and theologian Professor Robert Beckford and his family. And that work is going to inform the museum content, the museum narrative, but in particular, how we look at the identity that particularly people who have that surname connect to that name, and an understanding of the history that led to that surname. We're also working with other UK partners that hold Beckford collections. So in particular, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the British Museum, the National Trust for Scotland, so that we can explore how the material culture is being used in order to interrogate the wealth that this country benefited from through the transatlantic slave trade and what was produced through that wealth, and focusing in particular on other collections that have Beckford objects. But we also want to set it into the bigger story, so then place the tower and the story of Beckford in the context of Bath, and Bath's connections to the transatlantic slave trade, and how the story of Beckford is one aspect of this really big story that you've heard about from Richard and that you've heard about from Polly, about the foundation of Bath as the Georgian city that we know today, and placing the broader history of the city at the forefront of the work that we're all collectively doing. So hopefully that it's sort of linking lots of these stories together, but encouraging the way that the history of Bath is told, to ideally not just be here's the history of Bath and here's the history of Bath and the transatlantic slave trade, but that the history of Bath is a fully embedded, inclusive history of the city.
Thank you very much, Amy. I don't know, Claire, were you going to add anything further to that, or you're going to be here though for questions, aren't you, later? That's great, thank you. So I think it's really interesting to hear the different ways that we've all been working over the last year on this really important issue. And I'd like to ask Louise now to talk about the work that the Holborn Museum has been doing. And I suspect you might also refer to the painting that Richard also shared with us earlier. So over to you, Louise.
Hello, everyone. My name is Louise Campion, and I'm the Head of Learning and Engagement at the Holborn Museum in Bath. I wanted to share a few of the things we've been working on, and as you can hear, I think there's a real coming together of heritage organisations to really push on this. And to make visible and amplify the untold stories. For the Holborn, the untold stories in our collection and the narrative of the museum, and also the wider city of Bath, and maybe challenging the Georgian heritage story that we're all familiar with, and that many children going to schools in Bath and North East Somerset, this is the story that is told. So much of the initial work which has pushed the change in the Holborn Museum and a new interpretation, a new display has come about because of the research of a colleague called Jill Sutherland, and I want to say her name out loud, and I want you to remember it because she worked before lockdown. She worked at the Holborn researching into the William Holborn and his ancestors and his relatives to tell the story of where his wealth came from, the wealth that allowed him to collect all the things that are in the Holborn Museum. And she researched, she consulted, and she designed a radical redisplay of something that's always been in the Holborn, and it's a plantation day book, and maybe we can see an image of it. Thank you. So yes, so in the collection there has been this book, and it was in a drawer. You could see it, but it wasn't sort of very visible, and it didn't have a large explanation as to what it was. And you might want to know, well, why is there a plantation book from Barbados from 1722 in the collection with all the Gainsboroughs and the other objects? And so this redisplay, which is now open to the public. Do please come and see it. Is the beginning of the Holborn talking about the wealth and everything that we've been talking about, the wealth that came from plantation ownership and came from the work of enslaved people and their labour. And so when you come to the Holborn, you will see this new display, you will see this book on display. What you might not notice is that the pages are ripped out. There aren't the pages of that book that would originally have had the names of the enslaved people are missing, and we don't know why, but they're not there. So you'll see in the other image the names of people. Sorry, it's just moved, but on that plinth, and those come from a later plantation day book that Jill worked with Barbados Museum, which is it's actually where that plantation was, and they shared later names of people that worked on that plantation. And what I just wanted to say is that I think this is a new way of maybe museums showing and talking about these histories, because it's actually when Jill was thinking about how to display this book, it's so powerful and it contains so much pain, and it's you know, it's a very it's a very important thing for a lot of people to see it, and we wanted to honor that and to acknowledge that. And the way that Jill and we have worked to do this is to put those names that are missing from that book, to acknowledge that. And there's also on the front of the plinth that you can't see an epitaph. It's a poem that a contemporary artist has written to honor those people, and those enslaved people. And that's quite an unusual thing to do in interpretation, because it's about recognizing pain and emotion, and a lot of other things as well. And I'm also really pleased, if you can show the next slide, to say that as well, as part of this display, you'll see it here. There is a whole section showing the biographies and the faces of people who, from the 18th, 19th and 20th century, who stood up and fought against the slave trade. There were abolitionists, but also people fighting for equality and for, well, Black activism. And I think it's really important to have this here, because I work with school groups come round, and we walk around the museum, and it's great to have these people here that are in the display. And the other thing is, it's a permanent display, it's not temporary, it's forever. And I think that's the other thing that's really important. So I just wanted to say, as part of this, that we were so fortunate to work with Boys in Mind, and I worked with Eli, who we heard from, and Lucia, and they helped to create a film where young people, many of them from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds, to talk about what they thought about this exhibition, or this redisplay, I should say, and learning about history in Bath and what they didn't know. And I think so many young people don't know the full history, and actually I didn't. And Richard, sort of his walks and talking to him, I've educated myself so much more about the site. I didn't know about really, I did to some extent, but not really about this untold history of Bath. And so just to end by saying, if you'd like to see the films that were made with boys in mind, with young people, then they are on the Holborn YouTube. Also on our website, we have the whole of this sort of redisplay online, and it's a really good learning resource if you want to look at it, to give a sense of William Holborn, but also other families in the wider wider picture. And yes, please do use it and look at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. So I think that brings us to the end of our presentations. I've slightly apologised that there were a bit of a sort of whistle stop through a huge range of work that's been going on over the last year. I think it's really interesting to have heard the sort of how everybody's work is sort of interrelated with other people's work, yet there isn't any huge overlap as well, which I think is reassuring, that we can make sure that we are sort of tackling the issues without necessarily duplication as well. So I'd just like to say thank you to everybody who's made those contributions in this panel today, but also for the work that you've all been doing. So I'm now going to have a quick look at the questions, and I see that some of the questions that have been put forward I think may have been answered already, but what I wanted to just ask, and I think this is the first question which came in, was around the charter, and it was just to ask Jason how families and children could get involved in working on that charter. So that's the first question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, at the moment we've got the charter in draft form, so we've drafted what we think is a good starting point for the charter, and we've sent that out to our school partners. So schools are sharing that now with their students, so it's going to be great to get student feedback on that. We've sent it out to obviously other partner organisations to share with their either young people that they're working with or parents that they're working with. That's great. Boys in Mind have had it, so hopefully, and we've had some good feedback from Kate, who obviously runs that project, and a number of young people who've been involved in those webinars and films over the last year. We've sent the charter to them as well, and they've fed back. Obviously, Black Families is in contact with a lot of parents, so we've sent the charter out to our user groups, parents and young people, to get their feedback. And obviously what the question that we were asked by Chai is a great one. So how do we get it out to wider kind of parent community? So I think that's a really good suggestion that we send it out to St Andrews Primary School. So I might actually look for a few other primary schools as well that we can send it out to, and maybe talk to our secondary school partners, and if they can share it with parents who would be interested in doing that. So we're definitely at the consultation stage. I could quite easily sit at home, working from home, and write that charter on my own, but we want it to be informed by everybody's views and opinion, and we want the more people that can feed into it and make it a charter that we can all be proud of and buy into is really important. We especially want schools to be involved in this. I think a lot of work that we've done in the past is done to schools. So we're very keen that schools are on board in helping develop this. And I think as long as I've been working, I mentioned 25 years or more, but I think the momentum now that schools have got to make positive changes, and the changes they've already made over the last year have been really great. So I think they're now really poised to want to make a positive change and also have ownership of developing that charter with organisations like ours. So yeah, so great. So I think first job tomorrow will be sending that charter draft to St Andrews to get some parent feedback.
That's brilliant, and I think it might be worth perhaps penning a note to our schools network generally, because I'm sure many other primary schools will be interested, and indeed secondary schools as well. I did notice that Chris Wilford for a brief time was was watching the webinar, so I'm sure he will be a good person to contact as well about making sure our schools are also engaged with on this. So I had another question again from Chair, which was about the Bath and Colonialism action group. I can't remember who first mentioned it from the panel, but if somebody could just share how it is possible to get involved in that. Polly.
Thank you, Dina. Yes, the action group was set up last summer, again in response to the Black Lives Matter movement, and it was a sense that everyone had that sense of urgency at the time and since, and really wanted to sort of get in the room together and talk about possible ways of finding better ways of telling the city's history and being more honest about all those aspects that we've been covering this evening. And it's steadily grown in strength, and there is such a power in being in the same room, in the Zoom room together, because we can talk about our own histories at our own sites, but also find that common ground, which, Dina, you've already commented on this evening. And in fact, it's already resulted in a partnership project called the Bath and Colonialism Newspaper Archive Project, which has received funding from the National Archive, because what we're trying to do is work together. There's the Abbey, it's Beckford's Tower, and Bath Record Office all working together to look at 20 years of between 1760 and 1780 of the Bath Chronicle, and looking at terms like mahogany, like sugar, just to see what references there were at the time in order to get an understanding of what was known about colonialism at the time, you know, in the city. If you were just a member of the public at the time, what did you know about what was going on? What was there? What presence did it have in your daily life? And that's really been rewarding. We've been working with volunteers. We're going to have a website in the new year where members of the public can look for themselves. So it's driven by that need to get that information out there and give a more fully rounded history of Bath. So we'll keep everyone informed as things continue.
Thank you very much, Polly. And I can see, as I suggested before, I can see that in the future we will need to have another webinar to just give a further update to everybody on so I confused myself then because I thought I'd muted myself, but I hadn't, to give a further update to everybody on how we've been progressing over the next year as well. So I'm just going to have a quick look to see if there's any more questions that have come in. I'm looking at both the chat and the question and answer piece, but there is a comment from a Christina Hoath who went to see the display on Friday and says great work. I think that must be the display at the Holborn, perhaps, because I think that's when the comment came in. But having seen both the display at the Holborn and also Bath Abbey, I would say, you know, we've absolutely are, I think, moving in the right direction, but it would be good to get more feedback, perhaps from people who, you know, might think there's more work to be done, and perhaps give us an idea of, you know, perhaps the direction each of us might, you know, could be following in the future. So I'm now going to just quickly go around our virtual panel room again and just see if there's any last comments that anybody wants to make, because I think it'd be quite a surprise to everybody, but we're almost at the end of our allotted time. It seems to have gone by so very fast. So I'm just going to you, Elijah, first, to see if you had any last words that you wanted to say, just on, you know, the work that you've done and any thoughts you might have for the future.
Yeah, last words, I just want to say thank you for, you know, letting me speak on this in this webinar. I've really enjoyed listening to everyone else, and it's really, you know, positive for me to see how far Boys and Mind have come since releasing that first film that we did. It's just great to see what the community of Bath are doing in this topic, and I'm just feeling positive about it all. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. That's lovely to hear. Jason, any last words from you?
Yeah, I think it's great to see change happening. I think this is titled Progress and Challenges. I think we've obviously identified a lot of challenges over the last year. So it's really great now to see the progress that is being made and is continuing to be made since then. And as you said, Dina, I think it involves partnership and everybody working together. And I think all of the people who spoke today you can just see how we're all connected. We're all partnering up with some key organisations and with the council as well. So I think change is happening and progress is happening, and that's the result of some great partnership working. Finally.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. Richard.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, it's been very special this evening. That's really good. I would particularly like to say to Elijah, you know, I really, really salute you. You guys bared your souls so that we could hear, and it's very powerful. That first film is very powerful, as is the film that came through the Holborn project. So thank you very much for that. There's 2 points I'd just like to make very quickly. First of all, there's a lot of talk about wealth. And the sort of often the criticism is that, you know, well, it's just you're poor and you're, you know, envious of these other people's wealth. The issue for me is how that wealth was produced and the silence around that. They don't want us to know how that wealth was produced, and that the people who produced that wealth have not had a fair share of it. And so it's an issue of equality. It's a fundamental issue of equality that we're addressing, not some kind of thing of, oh, they're really rich and all of that. And the second point that I want to make is a very powerful point from a thing that I picked up watching stuff in coming out of the civil rights movement in America, that if we don't talk about the bad stuff, what happens is the good guys, we never hear about them. So there are tremendous stories in Bath of people, and all around the world, of people who resisted their capture, resisted enslavement, resisted on the plantations. You know, very much the story of the abolition of the slave trade and the abolition of the status of slavery in the British Empire is a story of resistance. And if we don't talk about the bad stuff, what happens is that we don't hear the stories of the people who stood up and were counted. And even in Bath, there were people who stood up and were counted and have done really great stuff, both in recent times and in the past. And it's really, really important that we do that. It's about the history that we tell ourselves. It's about the history of the city that we live in. It's about the history of our country. And if we don't tell the whole history, that whole rich, complicated story, we are diminished. That's the point I'd like to finish with.
Thank you, Richard. And I recall a really poignant fact that you said and repeated at pretty much every stopping point we had on the walk we went on, where you said how much each former slave owner had received following the Abolition Act, and then how much each slave had received. And in every single instance, the slave had received nothing at all. So thank you for reminding us of that. So can I ask Polly if you've got any sort of last words that you would like to share?
Thank you, Dina. Yes, just a really quick thank you to Elijah and everyone. But Elijah, thank you so much for, you know, you and everyone involved in those films, you know, fantastic kind of courage and eloquence. And it's just such a galvanizing, powerful reminder of why we're trying to do what we're trying to do. And there's so much more to do, but this has been a really positive occasion. So thank you everyone who've been involved. So thanks, Dina, for organising it.
Thank you, Polly. And last but not last even, second to last, Claire, I think is there any last words that you'd like to add following on from the presentation from Amy earlier?
I think the only thing that I would really add is the fact that we haven't resolved everything yet. We haven't figured it out ourselves. We're very much in learning and listening mode, and that's a really important thing to convey. And we talk a lot about our interpretation and nothing being permanent. And I think as we go through a process of learning, what's really important is we create something in the museum that can change and adapt. So as we find out more, as we hear from different people, it's really important that can actually be fed into our approach. So we're very much looking at things that are flexible, changeable, and we just see this as an ongoing, permanent journey, really. So any opportunity we have to engage with people, hear from people, if you're really interested in what we're doing or you want to contribute to what we're doing, I would just really urge you to get in touch, because That's just absolutely what we're looking to do at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. And Louise.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add, but I again thank you to Eli and Lucia and all the young people from Boys in Mind, because it's when you talk to young people, you know, they're the ones that are you know going to grow up in this city and maybe make it their home or not. And I think that what they're saying, and actually them wanting to hear that these histories, because it's important to them. You know, history connects us to the present, and you know, I think for a lot of people, heritage is something that just happened in the past. So these things happened in the past, but actually who we are now, as Richard says, our experience, there is still modern day slavery happening now, and these things connect very much to where we are now and where we're going into the future. So it's not a dusty old past, it is now as well. And I think young people, that they are thirsty, they really want to understand and have, you know, the full story, so that they can, you know, they can change the future. Yeah.
Thank you, Louise. And yes, I think in my last words myself would like to echo what you've said about the value of talking and listening to young people. And I too would like to thank Elijah and his friends in Boys in Mind and Girls Mind Matter too, because I think that the films that you have produced are incredible. They really are real, sort of gives us all a real insight into perhaps parts of life that we just, you know, perhaps many of us on this in this webinar haven't experienced ourselves. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'd also like to pick up on a point that Claire made too, that there is more to do. We haven't resolved everything, but we are still listening and we are still all learning. So please, if we are missing anything, then take it upon yourselves. If you are either listening to this webinar live now or on our YouTube channel, then please contact us and let us hear from you as well. So I'd like to say a massive thank you to all of the panel for all the wonderful things you're doing in shining a light on those hidden stories, for doing what you're doing in terms of making visible and amplifying those untold stories of Bath and also of North East Somerset as well. So finally, I'd like to say thank you once again to the presenters, but also to the team behind the webinar as well. And on that note, I think I shall just say thank you and good night. It's been lovely to share this webinar.